In springtime, roots drink deep from the wakened earth. Young leaves shine in the quickening sunlight. Dance the song of New Year's birth. The dance goes on and is never ending. The circle turns and the singer sings. The year turns round and the wood in springtime does not care what the winter brings. The dance goes on and is never ending. The circle turns and the singer sings. The year turns round and the wood in springtime does not care what the winter brings. When the leaves are long in the days of summer and the light drifts through them cool and green, the great trees stir in their dreamy sleep and sing slow tales of the years they've seen. The dance goes on and is never ending. The circle turns and the tale unfolds. The year turns on, but the wood in summer has no thought for the winter's cold. The dance goes on and is never ending. The circle turns and the tale unfolds. The year turns on, but the wood in summer has no thought for the winter's cold.
Fáilte over Ash. Welcome back, everybody. Emer Burke here. Just in case you're joining us for the first time today, this is the second part of our online winter gathering brought to you by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So for those of you who are here already this morning, I hope you enjoyed our presentation from our four wonderful speakers from Aotearoa, New Zealand. So for this next session, we are going to the US, to Taos, New Mexico. And let me introduce you to Stewart. I'll just mute you there for a minute, Billy. So Billy has been a long time pagan practitioner where he studied with Shekinah Mountain Waters, Z Budapest, and Starhawk. And he is a teacher in the reclaiming tradition. And he's a bard in Druid in the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. And he would like to talk about the history of American music and the banjo in particular, and how he has made this a spiritual practice. So Billy, over to you.
Am I unmuted? Yeah, oh, good. I'm unmuted. Hi, how are you guys? Good morning. So it's 4:30 here and -1 degrees. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the banjo and American music and how the banjo kind of manifested in America. That's very, very interesting because it just, wow, for one thing, it was a spiritual instrument. When the Africans came over, the enslaved Americans that they became, they couldn't bring anything with them. And, but what they did do was when they got here, when they got to the Caribbean, they made this instrument here. This is a gourd banjo. And there's a green man and a tuner. You got to have a tuner. So they made this beautiful instrument here. And it just manifested here, like the spirit of America and the African Americans and the Irish that came over, and also the Native American people. I'm going to play a Native American tune in a little while. It's actually from Canada, from the Métis people of Canada, where they have a huge fiddle tradition up there. But this instrument, manifested here. And so how does that tie into my Druidry? Well, it's kind of an interesting, very evolved, very interesting for me. I was a punk rock musician, not very good. I kind of joke that's why I was a punk rock musician, even though I was in some pretty good bands. One day I got kind of tired of that and I picked up the banjo and I could play it. And what is that? the awen just flowed through me, and I could play this instrument much better than I could ever play guitar or bass. And I knew the music. Like, I could sit down with the fiddle player. The banjos, usually they say it's the backbeat to the fiddle, the bass to the fiddle, the drum to the bass. So I could just sit down with the fiddle player. All I need to know is what key it's in, and I could just take off and play. That's been that's a very interesting spiritual development, because the awen flowed through me, it just flowed through me. So I'm going to play a little bit here on this gourd banjo. So what happened is the slaves were taken to the Caribbean, and they started making instruments, and they were only used in spirituals. When they were down in the Caribbean and stuff, they weren't a folk instrument at all yet. It was used with drums. You can find old pictures of them playing this instrument with drums, and it was done in their spirituals. But what I'm going to play right now is a tune that was probably written right after slavery. Of course, no African Americans were given credit on these tunes, and how we can tell is by the beat of these songs, and also by the lyrics. So this is called Cornbread and Beans. Cornbread and beans and good old collard greens keep my skillet good and greasy all the time. Oh Lord, keep my skillet good and greasy all the time. If you say so, I'm gonna shine no more. I'm gonna tear down the steel house and go home. Oh Lord, I'm gonna tear down my steel house and go home. There's a bloodhound on my track, Lord, I ain't coming back. I'm gonna tear down this steel house and go home. Oh Lord, I'm gonna tear down this steel house and go home. Cornbread and beans and good old collard greens. My skillet good and greasy all the time. Oh Lord, keep my skillet good and greasy all the time. So, we play it with this, what is called a downstroke. So that downstroke was the original, how they originally played it. So there we go. There's a little bit of the beginning. I want to talk about my own kind of spiritual journey with this instrument. So 5 years ago, before I came to OBOD, I was a musician. I was already playing. I was playing in most people call it bluegrass, but those of us within the music call it old time bluegrass. And I was playing this music, but like Emma said at the beginning, I'm sorry, I'm very dyslexic. I ruin names and words and all that for things. But I keep losing myself too. It's 4:00 in the morning. Did I tell you guys it's 4:00 in the morning? But so what happened was when I came to OBOD, I kept wanting to do this long, deep spiritual work, going out into the forest, doing all this stuff. And, but it kept coming back to the music. And I, going through the bardic grade, and talking about creativity, I tried writing poetry. I can barely spell, and my poetry is through strings. Yes, I can sing. But my poetry is, goes through the strings, through my hands. And so as my practice developed in OBOD, the bard kept coming out. I was a musician, but now I'm a bard. And what is that? That, to me, what that means is that music is my spiritual practice. And why the banjo is so important to me is it like I keep saying, it developed here in America, and I developed here in America. Why could I barely play the guitar? And I, like I said, I was in bands, but I thrashed around through a bunch of effects. Why when I picked up this instrument could I play it? Well, my roots go way back into the Appalachia, way back to where, so this instrument started in the Caribbean and was taken up into the Smoky Mountains, where the Irish were coming in, Native Americans were there. It was their homeland. And so this music started to develop. This banjo here, this is little Willie. He's 121 years old. So this music started to develop there in the Appalachian. It became something else. Actually, I want to play a different banjo right now. This is Chuck. I'm going to play a song called Morning Morning Dew, or Frosty Morn. And you're going to hear the Irish influence of this song. Most of these songs, we don't know where they come from. They just sprang up through musicians, and word of mouth, who wrote it and who composed it or whatever has long since been lost. The song's probably about at least 100 years old, probably much more, probably more like 150. Civil War time, probably. So you can see the difference in these two banjos. This one has frets, so frets were starting to be developed too. They came in at about the time the guitars started to come in, fretted instruments. Little easier to play on. This is much easier to play on. So this music started to develop. I'm going to do 2 other songs. I'm breaking these songs down. I'm not playing them as long as I'd normally play them, of course. The first song I'm going to do is called Ducks on a Pond, and the second song is called The Cuckoo. And what's interesting, first of all, the first song, how we work with this music today is it's handed down. I learned this song from a man named Doug Goodhart. Doug Goodhart learned this song from a man named Alan Jabbar. And Alan Jabbar learned it from a man named Henry Reed, who learned it from his grandfather who was in the Civil War. So this is how this music is handed down. And this technique of banjo that I actually played on the last tune, and I'm going to play on this tune too, came from there. The next song that I'm going to go into, the cuckoo, what they say about the song The Cuckoo is that it came over from Ireland and Scotland, doesn't sound anything like it sounded now and what it sounded like in the Appalachia 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Because it was one of the first songs that was not about God. You know, most songs had to be about God or you couldn't do them. Kind of, you know, the same thing with the banjo being a spiritual instrument at first. You did not play that song unless you played spiritual, or you did not play that instrument unless you played spiritual songs. So a lot of these tunes, it was the same way. So this tune here is a Henry Reed tune. I'm going to go into the cuckoo. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird, and she warbles when she flies, and she never hollers cuckoo till the 4th of July. I'm gonna build a log cabin on a mountain so high, so I could see that old Willie when he goes riding by. Oops. So of course I'm cutting the song short, and I was thinking about that, so I hit a sour note. How fun is that? You know, so I believe music has a spirit. You know, I truly believe there's a spirit to music that like, you know, I'm an animist, so I believe everything has spirit, right? So music has spirit. So the banjo, and what the banjo gave to American music that has spirit, that came out of the Appalachia, that, you know, created rock and roll. I mean, you know, all of it was interconnected, you know, those webs we talk about in our spirituality. So, you know, I truly believe these songs have a spirit, you know, and they evolve as time goes on. When I play actually that song on stage, when my band kicks in, you know, we speed it up a bit, as you know, I sing the first verse slow and then we kick in, and that gives it this American and my punk rock roots. You know, that comes in too. Also, I'd like to say I'm transgender and my voice has changed so much through the years. So what I'd like to get in before I go is one more tune, because this tune came from the Métis people, that is a Canadian Indigenous group. It came out of their fiddle playing. And I'm playing it on this 120-year-old SS Stewart banjo. 121. Wait, we're going into 3. She's close to 100. 123 years old. She, I call her Little Willie because she's named after my father, really. And my friend was jamming together, and he goes, "That banjo is Little Willie." So I'm going to do my best not to mess this tune up. I'm a little nervous. I don't know why. You know, I play on stage in front of all kinds of people. Oh, this song's called Gray Owl. I find the song to be quite spiritual. Like I said, it came from the Métis fiddle tradition of Canada. That's an indigenous people of the Canadian up in Canada have a great fiddle tradition. Oh, I'd like to say one more thing, because I'm going to kind of hand this over after this tune. Is that we talk about this music among Native Americans, and it's just not talked about, and it should be. And we need more Native American fiddlers. But during the Trail of Tears, I don't know how many people, you know, rumor says it was like 500 people were killed because they wouldn't leave their fiddles and their banjos behind when they were taken on the Trail of Tears. It's a whole other subject. If you don't know about it, just look up the Trail of Tears. So this tradition of music was deep within the Native American and the Native American roots in it that you can kind of hear sometimes. I'm going to finger pick. I'm going to do a different style on this tune. So you're not going to hear that kind of tribal sound, I don't think, as much. Maybe so, but I love finger picking this. Okay, that was my timer. We're done. All right. Yeah. I set a timer so I wouldn't go over. So hold on. Let me I guess I have a little more time to talk because I haven't been cut off yet. But come on anytime you want to cut me off. Come on in, guys. So my Grove mate is coming in to talk about our land here that we live in Taos, New Mexico. And I was brought to this land, like I was brought to this music. And yeah, it's just incredible. The American landscape and what brought us here, the spirit of this land that brought us here. And the genocide, I'm not going to get into. I'm just going to get into the spirit of the music. But yeah, let me see. We're still waiting on those guys. I'll play this song, same song. I'm going to do it in what we call clawhammer. That was two finger picking style. This is clawhammer style.
That was absolutely wonderful. Absolutely. Travis says, I've always appreciated older music and like folk music and stuff like that. It's all meaning and a story behind it. Very interesting. Very beautiful music. Thank you. So anyone else has questions, put them into the Q&A. We can have a kind of a panel discussion at the end of this after our next speaker has spoken. That was just wonderful. Absolutely. I'm just blown away by it. Thank you so much.
You know,
So
this is our Celtic music here, and that's something I have to embrace because I keep wanting to do Celtic music, but this is our spiritual music here in the Americas. So.
Wonderful. So I'm going to introduce Malea. So this is Malea Powell, who is a professor of research in the College of Arts and Letters at Michigan State University, where she is a faculty member in the American Indian and Indigenous Studies. She's a mixed blood of Indiana, Miami, Eastern Shawnee, and Euro-American, that is Welsh and Swedish ancestry. She is a practicing Indigenous pagan, a druid, a seer, and a witch, and she draws deeply from her lifelong relationship with the invisible world. Her experiences with a lifetime of work with elders, wise women, cunning folk, herbalists, and medicine people from a diverse set of cultural and ancestral traditions. So Malea is a bard within OBOD, a member of the Ancient Order of Druids in America and of the Sisterhood of Avalon. She is a certified life and mindfulness coach, a certified master herbalist, and an OBOD trained celebrant and legal ceremonial officiant, and a member of the Native Roots Medicine Collective in Taos, New Mexico. Malea, you are so welcome. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Like Billy says, it's almost 5 a.m. here, so we're both a little rusty this morning. Billy has his banjo. I have my notes. It's part of who I am as a scholar and a practitioner. So I want to talk a little bit about the land here in Taos, New Mexico. And while I do it, I want to try to show you this beautiful picture of our glorious, glorious mountain that I think I can do, she says as she fiddles with all the things. Never mind. It's going to be too hard. So I'm just going to just crash that and we'll see if I can do it later in the Q&A. So I want to start today by acknowledging that Billy and I currently live on the seized and occupied homelands of the Red Willow peoples of the Taos Pueblo. Specifically, I sit on a piece of land that was part of the Lucero de Godoy land grant from the Spanish colonial government to Antonio Martinez in the 17th century. And it was offered as a bounty to the Martinez brothers for their labor in the Spanish crown during the Second Pueblo War. The Martinez family has maintained these lands since. In fact, our neighbor is a Martinez. But I want to offer thanks and respects to the contemporary Tiwa peoples, the Red Willow peoples of the Taos Pueblo, and to their ancestors for their persistence and patience in maintaining right relations in this place, and to all living beings who currently reside here. So one of the things to know about Indigenous peoples, especially in North America, is in some ways our job is to maintain right relations in the lands where we live and to pray for right relations all over the globe. And the folks of the Taos Pueblo have been doing that for a really long time. So I don't know how many of you know about colonization in the Americas. It happened later than colonization in places like Wales and Ireland and Scotland, but it did eventually happen. So the Spanish arrived here in 1540 in the Taos Valley as part of the Coronado expedition. And the Pueblo here, the Pueblo peoples here were here. They had been here for thousands of years. So the Spanish arrived in 1540, and by 1620, the Spanish Jesuits had built a church in what was in the Pueblo. In 1660, the priest was killed, the church was destroyed, and the Taos people took control of their lands and their religion again. The Spanish retaliated brutally, and so by 1680, the seven northern pueblos plus the Taos Pueblo worked together to enact what they call here in the Americas the Pueblo Revolt. I like to think of it as a Pueblo independence war, but they forced the Spanish to retreat. The Spanish returned in 1692. Around 1846, during what is called the Mexican-American War, Taos locals, the Pueblo and the Spanish settlers here resisted U.S. Colonization. And what this did is it created a unique tricultural community here in northern New Mexico. A lot of anthropologists will write and historians will write about this sort of unique community. It's hard to describe it. This is still a very old place in the way it thinks about itself. The relationship between members of the Pueblo and members of the Spanish settler community is hard won and carefully cultivated. Sort of more what I call Euro-American or white folks moved in slowly into this valley because of the alliance between the two colonized peoples. But what you have here is a kind of set of ancient and not so ancient agreements between peoples who now in the US are oppressed and marginalized. Taos became really popular in the early 20th century, though, with writers and artists from the East Coast of the United States. Folks like Mabel Dodge Lujan and artists like Blumenstein formed what they called the Taos Art Colony, and they brought this sense of mainstream dominant culture, artisan and writerly practices to the Taos Valley, and that's really when tourism began in Taos. Taos is famous, of course, for our Pueblo. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, as well as a National Historic Landmark. It is the original Pueblo at Taos. The two parts of it that sit on the river are one of the longest continuously inhabited structures in the world. The Pueblo is still inhabited, the old part of the Pueblo, for about 1,200 years now. So people have been living in it for a long time. The people of the Taos Valley, the Tiwa, have been here for many of thousands of years. Prior to that, though, they date their ancestors back to the ancient Anasazi, and even prior to that, to the Puebloan peoples who would have preceded the Anasazi. So you have this ancient culture that then becomes very popular for tourists and artists and writers and photographers. And in the 1960s, hippies. This is one of the things that Taos is especially known for in the United States is hippies. In the 60s, there are tons and tons of communes here. One that's really famous called the Hog Farm that was started by a guy named Wavy Gravy. And another commune that was also very famous, the New Buffalo Commune. They made the movie Easy Rider up here, and soon actors got added to the list of writers and artists and photographers who wanted to be here in Taos. And then in the 1970s, they started building what's called the Earthship Colony, which is an entire neighborhood of sustainable homes built out of reused materials. So Taos is a strange place in this regard, and coming to Taos is a very strange experience. We like to say that people don't end up in Taos accidentally, that you get called here, and specifically that the mountain calls you. And if the mountain doesn't want you here, she makes it really hard for you to live here. But the mountain does call, and she's the center of our spiritual life. And I'm going to say that for almost all religions here, the mountain is one of the most pervasive features in our landscape. And we're right here at the southern tail of the Rockies, in a range called the Sangre de Cristo. And so the way that Taos works is it's like a little curve, and the town is nestled in the curve of the mountains, the highest mountains in New Mexico. And so the mountains are a permanent feature of what we see every day and of the way that we think about spirituality. They impact the weather, they impact everything that we do here. And so what happens is all these cultures, these three different cultures, come together around ideas of sustainable agriculture, permaculture, a definite stewardship of the water, a way of thinking about living in a place that is not so easy to live in. The high desert is a fairly hostile environment. Right now, as I'm talking to you, it's about the real temperature is at about -1 Fahrenheit, which I think is about -18 Celsius. The wind chill is slightly higher than that, about -10 Fahrenheit, which I think is about -23 Celsius. I may have done the calculations wrong. So it's very cold here tonight. The sun will come up. It will be much warmer during the day, well above freezing, and then again, it will drop down at night. And that's pretty common, even in the summer, to have gaps of 20, 30, 40 degrees between the day and the night. So like I said, Taos is a completely unique place to live. What does any of this have to do with Druidry? The center of spiritual practice here is the mountain. We call her the Mother Mountain, and the ancient ancestors that live here, as well as all of those who died in various fights against colonization. As Amar said, I am Indiana Miami, Miamia, as well as Welsh and Swedish, and some other, as everyone in the US is, strange mixes of various little bits of places in Europe. But I was raised to think of myself as an Indigenous person. I was raised in um, on the edge of what is called the Great Miami Reserve in northern Indiana in the United States. Um, and and I was always raised to think of myself as Indigenous. I belong to a longhouse. Um, I've spent my life working with Indigenous students, studying Indigenous peoples. And so being Indigenous in a place that I'm not Indigenous to came as a challenge to me. I'll say that. Um, I'm in a place where the landscape is unfamiliar, many of the plants are unfamiliar. And when I came here is when I also first started practicing Druidry and learning to bring in Druidry and Indigenous practices together in this place has been life-changing for me. Druidry and Indigenous practices have a lot in common. Um, we're animists. We believe in what's called the web of life, what in my tribal community is called, a phrase we use to describe it as all my relations, which literally indicates that we're related to everyone, everything, every being, every particle of the universe. And so that idea is something I always knew. And so when I came into Druidry, I was really surprised and happy to find those ideas in place inside Druidry, as well as I learned more about my own Welsh ancestors specifically, and have been reading the stories in OBOD, and just learning more about what all my ancestors have in common in terms of the experience of colonization, the loss of language, the loss of religion, the loss of culture, the loss of our traditional life ways, and how hard we all have worked to maintain that and hang on to that and bring it back. So Druidry in this place meant I had to go out and learn a whole new thing about myself in relation to a landscape that I didn't know much about. Had to learn all the new herbs, all the new ways to respect and gather herbs here, all the new ways to have relationships with plants. I've spent a lot of time working with herbs like osha, which is bare root. It only grows above 9,000 feet. It's an amazing medicine for almost everything. There's very little that osha wouldn't be good for. The same with things like wild yarrow um, and aspen trees. Where I grew up, there weren't aspen trees, and I don't know if you know about aspen trees, but aspens are rhizomatic, and so they make this huge, large community under the earth. Some of the largest plant communities in the world that aren't mycelium are aspen trees. And so they are connected to each other. They communicate with each other. They have a built-in sunscreen on their bark. You can actually rub it off and put it on your skin, and it's a sunscreen. So I've spent a lot of time working with local healers and medicine people learning about the plants here. And so I teach classes sometimes about how to respectfully sink into a place that isn't your own. And I talk a lot about how we have to start with the land. You know, all of this is OBOD and Druidry together, right? You have to start with the land. You have to start with your relationship to the land, to the spirits of the land, and to your ancestors. And you sink in to those sets of relationships in a way that surrounds you and comforts you and holds you the same way that the Taos Mountains hold us here in the valley. These connections are always really organic, and they provide a constant stream of information, love, and support that we can use, I think, as people in other places where we go. Um, one of the things that is not very well thought of here in Taos is for people to come in and want to just turn Taos into where they came from. This is a place that forces you into a relationship with it. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a great thing. I think that's how we should approach all the places that we go to, is to make those connections with the land. And so my Druidry is now pretty firmly intertwined with my indigenous practice. And they grow together in this way that is strange and wonderful, and feels completely in sync and right with the world. There are some things that happen sometimes, though. So if I'm going to do a ceremony, which directions do I use? Do I use Druid directions? Do I use indigenous directions? And so those kinds of things get negotiated on a case-by-case basis, depending on what Spirit's telling me, what the ancestors have told me, and what I've learned in my prayers. So I don't want to take too much more time, but I do want to talk a little bit about what I was raised with called the 7 grandfather teachings, which are a set of teachings that are organized to teach us how to live and how to be. And when I first started my study in OBOD and my study in AOTA, one of the first things I recognized was how deeply these are a part of Druid teachings and Druid spiritual life. Even though they're not arranged in the same way they are for me as an indigenous person. And so the 7 grandfather teachings are prevalent in what we call Anishinaabe people's practices. These are people who live mostly up around the Great Lakes in the US and Canada. And I'm just going to go through them really quickly, and then we can get to questions. So the 7 grandfather teachings are love, and love is exemplified by the eagle. Respect, and respect is exemplified by the buffalo, the American bison. Bravery, which is exemplified by the bear. Truth, which is exemplified by the turtle. Honesty and integrity, which is exemplified by the raven. Humility, which is exemplified by the wolf. And wisdom, which is exemplified by the beaver. And to me, these teachings showed up immediately as soon as I started reading around in Druid materials and doing my OBOD study. And so, so I think that the practices have a lot in common, and I think that the commonalities come from being peoples who've been colonized, even though I think we don't always make those connections between folks who are seen as European and folks who are seen as indigenous in the US. But I think that indigenous and tribal peoples have a lot of practices and ideas and ancestral wisdom in common. And that's how I practice. And I think that means we have lots of time for questions. Does it, Amar?
Well, it was wonderful. We have some questions, so thank you. There's a few from Gabby actually, and I think they're really worth looking at. One is when the mountain called to you, how was it for you? Like, how did it manifest?
I mean, Billy can talk about his experience too here, but when the mountain called to me, we were here for vacation. I had been here in 1994 at a writer's workshop, and 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 the mountain called to me. She called to me in my dreams. Once I saw her, I couldn't forget her. And so when we came back 10 years later, for a vacation, I drug my husband here. He'd never been west of the Mississippi, which is really not good in the US to not have done that. Um, um, there's a way that you come over a pass and you see the Rio Grande Gorge, which is a giant crack in the earth across the Taos Valley on one hand, and then you see the mountain on the other. And I caught my breath, and I don't think I ever don't catch my breath when I see the mountain, even to this day. And then I realized that I didn't breathe the same in other places. That the way that I caught my breath here was the way that I would catch my breath at home when in Indiana when I was in our holy places. And so I just had to keep coming back until we could live here, because she takes hold of you, but she also tests you. And I don't mean that. I mean it in some ways. Taos is a very hard place to live financially, so that's a test. But also, I put down tobacco when we were getting ready to buy this property, and asked the mountain to tell me what to do. And I got 4 days of nightmares, where in the nightmares I was clearly being tested, physical, mental, spiritual tests to see if I had what it took to live here. And I tell people that, and they sort of roll their eyes and go on along. And I'm like, no, 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 that's what it means when the mountain calls you. Because she wants you to be committed here to the life here, and not to bring another life in, but to live the life that's here.
That's amazingly challenging. But you engage with the landscape and you don't manipulate it, which I suppose in our modern world, human beings are always manipulating the landscape. And here's someone putting manners on you, and that you can't ignore the call.
Mm-hmm.
You may have tried for a number of years, and then you'll come and you'll do. I think that's fascinating, just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. I think that people who ignore what she has to tell them don't live very well here or very successfully, and they eventually leave. Lots of people come here for 3 or 4 years and leave. Yeah.
Billy's over to Billy.
I want to tell my story really quick because mine is absolutely crazy. And this is what happens here. So I was working in a yoga studio. There's a performer named Robert Maribel. I listened to his CD. I loved it. He came and performed. He said, "You've never been to Taos." I went up and talked to him because, as you know, musicians, we talk. He goes, "You've never been to Taos?" I came here. I went back to my yoga studio with some soap I bought here. I started to carry it at my little store at the yoga studio. The woman carrying the soap had a position opened, and I wanted to live somewhere more sustainable. So me and my wife at the time came out here. I had been living in San Francisco for years. I didn't know there was anything outside of San Francisco bubble that is very liberal and queer, and and we moved here within a year of me, visiting, and I have not been able to leave. When my wife and I divorced, I don't want to get into it. When we divorced, I wanted to leave. I tried so many times. The mountain will not let me go. I've absolutely surrendered to her. Now I pray to her on a daily basis. She made my life. I always had a partner. I was always in a queer community. I don't really do that anymore. This other life I live that's very different, very, very different. So I just want to say this side of the mountain with somebody who is like spiritual, right? I'm very spiritual, and not a very big pagan community here. I'm like, where's the pagans? I mean, I really had to look for it. That has been hard. Interesting. That's it from me. But wow.
Absolutely. Wow. I just, it amazes me the power of the land if you can really tune in. It's incredible. There's a question. I think it's probably for you, Malea, but I mean, maybe Billy, you can answer this. Is there anything? This is from Gabby again. Is there anything within Druidry and your Indigenous teachings that do not gel, or that you've had to work with around to bring in, or do you leave some parts out because it simply does not fit for you or your beliefs? If so, what examples do you have?
Definitely. So as you know, in my introduction, you said I'm a scholar. I'm a trained decolonial scholar. It's what I've done my whole life for at least my adult life since I stopped being, in my crazy 20s. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I have moments where I have to like sit with myself. I have feelings about British colonization in the Americas. Yeah, lots of them. My people were allied with the French, right? So we allied with the French, and then we fought the British, and then we fought the U.S. And so I think that I definitely have feelings that I have to work through when I'm doing some of my studies and when reading other books that are obviously outside the OBOD curriculum. But I think that that's been part of my Druidry practice is to sit with myself. Some people would call it shadow work, but to sit with myself and to ask, what is really bothering you here about this particular thing, and how is it bothering you, and how can you get beyond it? Um, and what does it mean to get beyond it in a way that is authentic and truthful? Um, and so, yeah, and I think for me, the Arthurian tales are a trigger. And I don't know why. I think when I'm in them or trying to understand them, I had these moments that go flashback to, literature classes in college where it was just assumed that all the good literature was as we call, British. And I had to actually seek out things like Irish literature, right? The Irish Literary Revolution, where I had to seek out Scottish literature, where I had to go to the library and say, "Can you find me a Welsh novelist to read?" Um, because because of the education system in the US and other things. But as I realized, that was one of the first places I realized that other cultures were marginalized even within this thing that in the US we put under the head of British, which is really imprecise and awful, and we all know that. Um, so I think that sitting with myself and working through those things and my knee-jerk reactions to them has been really healthy for me. Um, but maybe not pleasant on a particular day. Definitely not pleasant for Billy when we're having lunch, and I'm like, "Oh my god." So, so yeah, I think that that has been one of the struggles. But there's so many commonalities that, for me, that's what always overrides it. And the Druid community is such an amazing community in the same ways that my Indigenous community holds me and teaches me and supports me. And so, yeah, so I think I really appreciate that.
Wonderful. And just to get back to that thing about the landscape calling you, Pat says she knows that feeling. Ireland would let her live away for a while to study, but the elastic would only stretch so far. It was always going to snap me back at the land's convenience. And that's an interesting one. Yes. So there's another question. Given that you live in Taos and all that's there, and this is a question for both of you, is what drew you to Druidry then?
I mean, I one of the things I can say is Billy introduced me to Druidry, so I have to give credit where credit is due. But the other thing is, I'd spent my whole life learning and understanding and being among Indigenous peoples, and I got to be of an age where both of the grandparents, my Powell grandparents, had passed, and they had always really been proud to be sort of Welsh descendants, right? That had been a big narrative in that family. This is a very American tale. Um, and I decided I wanted to learn more about what all that was. What's Welsh history? What's Welsh culture? What does Welsh language sound like and feel like in your mouth? How does it reorient you to reality? And so the more I studied, the more interested I became in understanding how my ancestors practiced. And so finding such similar experiences with colonization and such similar spiritual practices was revolutionary to me, opened my eyes, and again made me confront things about myself, right? That all of my sort of substantial ancestors that lived in my memory and in my family stories had been through these experiences and had lived in these relationships to the land. So that's it. That's what drew me. And then the community keeps me here. I'm a co-moderator of the divination group, and Catherine and Blake keep me here. They keep me balanced and stable. And yeah, it's an
Just
amazing community. I'm so grateful that we have the online community because I can feel we get to be part of it in a way that we wouldn't otherwise, because we'd just have a grove of two. And
well, a certain person said, "Where two or three gathered in my name, there am I in their midst." And however, who the I is up to you, and as Billy said, he's an animist, so it's not just the two of you, it's all
it's all creation.
the other beings that are there. Billy, I'll ask you that question. What drew you to Druidry?
Well, I had those deep roots in the pagan community in San Francisco. I'm transgender first in the women's community, and then in the reclaiming community that was Starhawks. She hates when we all say it was her community that she started it, but she did. She's so into like the circle being all of us. And I was looking for something. It was more than 5 years ago now. I guess it was about 7 years ago. Yeah, my dog's 7, so it was 7 years ago. I was looking for something, and I had heard Starhawk on a podcast on Druidcast, and I looked up OBOD, and I saw the chorus, and I'm like, wow, this is perfect. And I'm also, my last name is Stewart. I'm very Scottish. And I never, even though I was really into the goddess stuff, it was more something kind of centered in San Francisco with, kind of all these different, I worked with Greek and so I wanted to sink deeper into my ancestral gods. And I found out I'm part Welsh when I did the DNA. That was kind of cool. So that was it for me. I just really wanted to connect and have a community, because there was a small community here, or there is a small community here, but not what I had in San Francisco, so I wanted that community, and I found it in OBOD with the OBOD online and everything. So that was how I connected. And then I found it was reclaiming, like it's one and the same. You guys were doing that across the pond, and we were doing what we were doing here in America with reclaiming, with our political beliefs and all that we don't talk about, but we do. But that's all I'm going to say. Being a reclaimer, I'm very political.
Can you just briefly, if you can, it may be an impossible task, to briefly, for our viewers, to briefly explain what reclaiming is?
Reclaiming is a pagan group that was started. Starhawk wrote the Spiral Dance, and then she had a big celebration when the Spiral Dance was released, the book, The Spiral Dance. And that became a every year event that became classes. She was already teaching classes, and one class became another class. And of course, Starhawk, if you've read any of her work or if you've seen her online, she's very environmentally political and all this stuff. So we started doing demonstrations. I was in the queer community. It was the 80s, and everybody was, the men were dying of HIV, and so we hit the streets with that. We became a very political group that we still are. You will not find us at McDonald's. You will not. You will find most of us out in our garden. Star likes to say that, my God, she used to look for God in all these different deities, and now it's dirt. And most of us can say that. So, that's on the basis. That's what reclaiming is. Look it up. There's a lot you could read, and please read all Star's work. It's awesome. And don't read her newest Spiral Dance, where she talks about we were all appropriating and doing weird stuff back in the 80s and 70s and 80s. We've changed.
Changed. That was wonderful. And we've got just a few seconds left. I was just thinking of the aspen tree, and I planted an aspen tree. When I joined the order, because I have all the oak trees in my garden, and it's just lovely to see my little mini aspen forest that I had not expected from one tree. And I'm just thinking about Druidry or OBOD as an order. You know, it started off with Ross Nichols in the UK, and how it has set those shoots. And then you have these, I suppose, little aspen groves popping up all over the world. And I was just really wished, because I love the aspen tree, and I did not know it was a sunscreen. Now, whether the aspen trees that grow here do that, because I'm as fair-skinned, I burn with my alabaster skin. I'm very little melanin apart from the odd freckle. So it would be nice to think that my own aspen trees would provide me with sunscreen. I think that's just magical. We've hit the time. It has been such a joy having you speak to both of you, and have you speak and listen to you. It's absolutely amazing. So, and it's just wonderful to hear, you know, the history of the banjo, how you're a bard, how you've woven that into your Druidic practice, and the same, Malea, how you integrate like a beautiful tapestry, the different traditions. It's just, it's mind-blowing. So thank you both so much. And I know there's been lovely comments and lovely reactions from our viewers. So I'll let you say goodbye, and then you can go back into the green room, and then I'll say goodbye, because we're going to come back again in the afternoon. So I'm sorry, I've got you on silent. Do you want to say goodbye, Malea, as well as Billy?
Bye. It's been great. I appreciate you all.
Yes. Love you.
Okay, so listen, thank you all for coming back. We're going to take a break now until 2 p.m. and then we will have another session with Druidry, where the Awan meets So I hope you can come back then. And so that will be 2 p.m. UK time. And enjoy this break. And until we see you later, slán go fóill.